Why me?
I like to think I see things in people.
He said he sees something in me.
If I had to put it in a word, I'd guess loyalty. Only maybe you got it for the wrong guy.
Hey everybody, and thank you for watching another video. My name is Murge, and welcome to the Breaking Bad What If series that I call the Heisenverse, a series where I make a change somewhere in the Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul timeline and explore how that one change ripples throughout the entire universe. And in this video, we explore the idea of Jesse pulling the trigger on Walter for poisoning Brock in the episode End Times. And I'll be honest, when I first seen that episode, I was 90 to 98% sure that Jesse would have pulled the trigger. I mean, the vein in his forehead was enough to convince me, but comment down below if you felt the same way I felt. And also, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Now, let's get into it.
I don't know what you're thinking coming here.
Jesse arrives at Walter's house wanting answers for Brock, but before he can say a word, Walter goes on about how Gus is gonna kill him and how he's been waiting all day for one of his men to show up. And while he looks through the glass door, Walter with his back turned doesn't see Jesse pick up the gun off the table. And when he turns around, Jesse confronts him about poisoning Brock. But acting oblivious to the whole thing, Walter tries to reason with Jesse and calm him down. But getting frustrated listening to Walter deny everything, he angrily tells him, "Stop lying and admit what you did," hitting him with the butt of the gun and knocking Walter to the ground. And Jesse tells him again, pulling the hammer back on the gun, "Admit it." And as Walter cowers on the ground begging for his life, out of nowhere he starts to laugh and manipulate the conversation, shifting the blame over to Gus and going on about how it could have been Tyrus who lifted the rice and cigarette while he was in the lab, and hinting that with the cameras around the lab and everywhere else, Gus likely knew about their plans to kill him. But the fundamental flaw in Walter's explanation is that he's giving Gus too much credit, almost to an uncharacteristic degree, which is something that Jesse instantly takes notice of as he tightens his grip on the gun. And as Walter finishes, he basically calls Jesse's bluff, telling him, "If you think I'm capable of something like this, then you kill me right now," pulling the gun in Jesse's hand right to his head and whispering, "Do it." Taking Jesse by surprise, and Walter says it again but a little louder, "Do it." "I'll do it," Jesse says with his heart racing, and Walter yells this time, "Do it!" And without any more thought, Jesse pulls the trigger. Moments later, Tyrus, who was following Jesse, hears the gunshot and rushes inside with his gun drawn. But once inside the house, he lowers his gun, looking on in disbelief at Jesse, who's breathing heavily, standing over a dead Walter White. Jesse then looks up, not exactly surprised to see Tyrus, who's just looking back with a blank expression, then focusing in on the bullet that was in Walter's head and confirming that the master chemist is officially dead. And he casually pulls out his phone to make a call to Gus, informing him about what happened. And after a 3 or 4 minute conversation, Tyrus says, "You got it," before hanging up the phone and telling Jesse, "He wants to see you at the hospital. There's a guy outside that'll take you to him. And leave the gun, please." And Jesse, who's still breathing heavily, looking down at Walter's dead body, just drops the gun at his feet and walks past Tyrus, leaving the house. Jesse arrives at the hospital to meet with Gus at the chapel, and he enters with a feeling of numbness after killing Walter, not knowing what to expect. And Gus would start the conversation asking, "How's the boy?" without even facing Jesse. The doctors, they don't know what's going on, but apparently Mr. White poisoned him. Jesse says in a jaded tone, with Gus now turning to face him and giving a look of confusion, saying, "Walter White? He poisoned a child? Why would he do this? Isn't it obvious? He did this to get back at me for helping you. His own twisted way of ripping my heart out before he's dead and gone." Jesse says, holding eye contact with Gus, who's still processing the fact that Walter poisoned a child associated with his partner. But after seconds of unbroken eye contact, Gus would change the subject to the business at hand. "This batch is surely ruined by now, correct?" And Jesse nods slowly, trying to read Gus's body language, but can't get a read on what he's thinking. And Gus would take a deep exhale before saying, "I want you to stay with the boy, and when you're ready, you can come back to work. Also, I'm on the medical board at this hospital, and I'll have a specialist come and look at his condition." And Jesse nods again and says while looking at the ground, I appreciate that. I truly do, but I don't think there's anything that your doctors can do about this." "And why is that?" Gus responds, "Because he was poisoned with ricin. He's dying," Jesse says, getting watery-eyed. Gus would then step closer, making Jesse visibly uncomfortable, and he grabs him by the shoulders and says, "Like I said, take as long as you need. I'm still going to send a specialist to get a second opinion. And when you're ready, we'll talk about your partner." And Jesse once again nods slowly and says, "Okay, thanks." As Gus and his men leave the chapel, and allowing for Jesse to reflect on what Walter said before he killed him.
"You're the cook, and you have proven that you can run a lab without me, and now that cook has reason to kill me. Think about it. It's brilliant.
And he goes back and forth with himself about whether he did the right thing by killing his old teacher, or should he now be worried about Gus coming after him. But he doesn't wonder about it too long before leaving the chapel to spend whatever time he thinks he has left with Brock. Picking back up with Tyrus and a few of his guys cleaning up Walter's home and disposing of his body, after inspecting the house, nothing would be out of place, essentially making the murder scene that happened less than 3 hours ago non-existent. And upon their final walkthrough, Tyrus receives a phone call from Gus wanting an update on the situation, which Tyrus lets him know that everything's been taken care of and they're basically on their way out. And Gus, who is just informed about Brock's condition by his doctor, tells Tyrus, "I want you to check the home for a plant by the name Lily of the Valley." And right as Gus gives that order, Tyrus would be looking through the glass at the plant sitting outside on the ledge and responds saying, "It's here. You want me to keep it with the body?" "Yes, and I want you to preserve the body for as long as you can until I return." "You got it," Tyrus says before Gus hangs up the phone. And currently Gus is on his way to meet with Mike, who's still recovering from being shot in Mexico. And once he arrives, the two would talk strategy on a plan to move forward with handling their issue of Walter White. And after filling Mike in on everything that happened between Jesse and Walter, then bringing to light the Lily of the Valley plant that was found at Walter's house, it all but confirms that Walter was indeed the one who poisoned Brock. And Mike says, "Well, there's no doubt that the DEA is going to be looking into this, especially with that brother-in-law of his. So I'm thinking, to avoid any attention on you, we take a page out of Walter's book and do something unforgivable. And I have just the idea." Gus nods before asking, "How much time do you need?" 72 hours max, and I'll need a couple pounds of that product." Mike responds sitting up and holding his wound, and Gus says getting ready to leave, "I'll have Tyrus on his way to you in the morning, and he'll have everything that you'll need." The next day passes, which puts us in the episode Face Off, but things this time around are a bit different to say the least. So we pick up with Skyler, who's been calling Walter since she woke up, but all calls have been going to voicemail, and she assumes the worst, remembering back to what Walter said before she left.
I've made choices. Listen to me. I alone should suffer the consequences of those choices, no one else. And those consequences, they're coming.
But Skyler will push her feelings to the side and just try to have faith that Walter will call once the situation has been worked out. But as the time passes and morning turns into night, more than enough time has passed and everyone is confident that there is no danger. And still, Skyler hasn't heard from Walter, and it's to the point where she has no excuse when Marie or Hank brings up that nobody has heard from him all day. So to avoid the question, Skyler decides to head home with Walter Jr. and Holly. But she can't avoid the question forever because even Walter Jr. is asking about his dad's whereabouts, and Skyler responds with a lie as she continues to drive, saying, "Well, when I last spoke with your father, he was closing up the car wash early, and that was maybe 2 or 3 hours ago, so maybe we'll see him when we get home. But you know your father, he probably misplaced his phone or something." And as she turns down the residential street, she breathes a sigh of relief seeing Walter's car in the driveway, and she says, "See, look, told you so." But as they enter the house, Skyler calls out, "Walt!" And Walter Jr. also calls out, "Dad!" But they're both met with silence in the house, and Skyler puts down Holly and she again calls out for Walter as she walks through the house checking the rooms. And Walter pulls out his cell phone and calls his dad, only to discover his phone vibrating on the kitchen countertop. And he calls out for his mom and shows her the phone and says, "Mom, do you think the guys that were after Uncle Hank got to Dad? Or do you think maybe he had another fugue state?" And Skyler says, holding back her tears, I don't know, sweetie, but I'm going to call the police. You call your Aunt Marie and Uncle Hank and tell them to come over now. And can you change Holly for me? I'm going to be in the room making the call, okay?" And Walter Jr., seeing his mom on the verge of tears, just tells her, "Oh, okay, Mom, you go ahead. I got this out here." And when Skyler gets in the room, she's finally able to cry and let the tears stream down her cheeks because Walter just might be dead. But she still holds out hope that he may have one last trick up his sleeve. But the hardest part for her is just not knowing. And within 30 minutes, Hank, Marie, and even Detective Tim Roberts, who was there to help when Walter went missing the first time, are now at Skyler's house. And there's a handful of agents doing a full search inside the house that could lead to finding Walter. And what they find while searching Walter's closet is a black duffel bag with at least 3 pounds of that legendary blue sky meth that's been bagged up into hundreds of little baggies looking to be sold. And the evidence just keeps piling up when they find money that was in the crawl space as well. And although it's not a substantial amount of money, it's enough to be considered drug money. And when the drugs and money are brought to Skyler and Hank's attention, it becomes a shock to both of them for different reasons. Because for Skyler, she tries to act like this is the first time her finding out about this, but being that it was her clothing that was vacuum sealed with the money, the police will have some questions for her. And for Hank, he's just lost for words at the idea that his own brother-in-law was some kind of drug dealer, which turns this missing person's case into a potential kidnapping, or worse, a homicide. And while everyone is at Walter's house, Mike and his guys were able to sneak into Hank and Marie's, and their plan is just to plant some more of that blue sky meth in Hank's house as well. But how it's done is not only having the drugs inside Hank's house, but also sprinkling shards of meth inside his bed, clothes, closet, and even dirty laundry to make the evidence irrefutable for the next phase of the plan. Because Mike's idea is to create a connection between Walter and Hank with the blue sky meth, and ultimately frame Hank as the brains, and Walter being, well, the cook. And once they finish up at Hank's house, Tyrus and Mike would meet up on the desert road with a beater car that has Walter's body in the trunk that's filled with ice packs. And they dress Walter up in a hazmat suit and seat him in the front seat, and they would also plant more blue sky meth in the car as well as $100 grand in the car to frame it look like a drug deal gone bad. Because in the word of Tyrus,
gotta make it look real.
Back at the hospital, Jesse is made aware of Brock's recovery and he is relieved that it wasn't ricin poisoning but berries from a plant called Lily of the Valley. And he begins to think that maybe it wasn't Walter that poisoned Brock, and if he did make a mistake. But interrupting his thoughts will be a familiar voice from behind saying, "Hey kid," which turns out to be Mike. And as Jesse watches Andrea and Brock through the hospital glass, Mike says, "We gotta talk." And picking up with Mike and Jesse in the car, Mike says in his usual tone, "I heard about what happened between you and your partner. I'm not here to say anything about it. I'm just here to give you the facts. First, if you're wondering, yes, Walter did poison the boy. We found the plant inside his house." And Jesse exhales like his conscience was just cleared as he sniffles, saying, "So, Mr. White, he had to go, right? Put it this way, if I was in your shoes, I would have done the same thing." Mike says, reassuring Jesse before he continues, "I was told that you were under the assumption that it was ricin poisoning. You wanna tell me a little bit more about that?" Jesse sniffles while looking up at the roof of the car before saying, "Mr. White and I had a plan to use ricin to kill Gus. And it was kept inside the cigarette inside this little tube thing. And 2 days ago when I went to Saul's office, Wait, it must have been him." Jesse says, figuring out where the cigarette went, and he says to Mike, "Take me to Saul's office. I'll explain on the way." And Mike puts the car in gear, and the two drive off. When they arrive at Saul's office, even though Mike and Saul aren't exactly on the best of terms, no one, not even Hugh, is going to get in his way. And once inside with Saul, he says in his usual friendly tone, "Fellas, what can I do for you? And Jesse, have you heard from your partner? I've been trying to get in contact with him all day and I haven't heard a peep. What's going on out there?" But Mike, doing all the talking, would keep it short and just tell Saul while flashing his gun, "Walter's dead. And if you don't want to join him, you better get real smart real fast. Now, where is it? And don't play games with me. You know what I'm talking about." And Saul's eyes get big as he quickly pulls out the cigarette out of his drawer that's in a plastic bag, and he pleads with Mike and Jesse, saying, "Okay, I have it here, but you have to believe me. I had no idea that he was going to poison a kid. If I knew that, I would have never gone through with it. You have to believe me, Jesse. Mike, please." Mike grabs the bag from Saul and tells him, "Let me find out that you're involved in something like this again, Saul, and I guarantee you won't live long enough to regret it." And after leaving the office, once they get back in the car, Jesse says, "So, what happens now?" "What happens now is I'm going to get rid of this, and you and me are never going to speak of this again. Not to anyone, not to each other, and certainly not to Fring. As far as you know, this never happened. You understand me?" Mike says, holding eye contact with Jesse, who's again visibly uncomfortable hearing Mike say something like that. And he responds saying, "Yeah, I got it. Next, how do you feel about cooking solo?" Mike questions. And Jesse says, "Yeah, I can get back to it." "Good. You need coffee, breakfast, anything like that?" Mike asks, starting the car. And Jesse says, "Nah, I'm good. Why?" "Because there's still a quota to meet." Mike says, pulling away and headed over to the lab. Meanwhile, over with APD, after receiving a call of seeing a car shot up on the side of the road, the police come to find out that it was Walter White. And given his current appearance wearing a yellow hazmat suit and finding drugs as well as cash inside the car, the attention has been shifted to Skyler as well as Hank, calling into question everything about Walter White and how nobody, especially those closest to him, could have known about his alter ego, Heisenverse. And the DEA is even reevaluating previous cases involving Hank, Blue Sky Meth, and Heisenverse just to find a connection, because in their eyes, it can't be a coincidence that a drug kingpin with the notoriety of Heisenverse has been around for as long as he have without some kind of involvement from the DEA to keep him out of their custody, or at least, that's what it looks like. And ASAC Marquette approaches Hank in a serious tone saying, "I'll be honest, Hank, this doesn't look good. But a way we can get ahead of this and spin it our way is you doing a voluntary search of your home to prove that you have nothing to hide, and it can go on record as supporting evidence just in case you need it." Hank reluctantly agrees and gives a go-ahead for the voluntary search warrant of his home, which for Hank would be the final nail in the coffin because what's found at Hank's house is enough to have him arrested, and most critical, a connection will be made between Walter White and Hank Schrader, putting him in an unwinnable situation where all the evidence speaks for itself. And to make matters worse, when it was made aware that Walter and Skyler paid for his medical bills, it becomes clear that the earnings didn't come from card counting or gambling. And with the only connection to Walter White being Hank and Skyler, who both seem to have no answer for the drugs being found in their homes, the feds would essentially pit them against each other in an attempt to get to the bottom of this. So in preparation for the inevitable court case, Skyler enlists the legal counsel of Saul Goodman, which for Saul, it's in his best interest for Skyler to win the case, so he doesn't hold back as they get ready for trial. It's been nearly 3 weeks since the world found out the truth about Walter White, aka Heisenverse, and we pick up with Jesse, who's just finishing up a batch with Tyrus as an assistant. And since killing Walter, Jesse just hasn't been himself lately, like his heart's not in it anymore, and it's very noticeable to his employers. And Mike says while they're packing up the product, "You alright, kid?" And Jesse says like he was broken from mid-thought, "Huh? Yeah, I'm good. Are we done here?" He says closing up the last of the bins and putting it on the scale. And while cleaning up the lab, Mike pulls Jesse from cleaning duty and they would take a ride to the chicken farm for a meeting with Gus. And while they're on their way, Mike asks Jesse a hypothetical question saying, "Let me ask you something, kid. If you can go anywhere with a fresh start, what would that be?" And Jesse looks at Mike with curiosity as he takes a few seconds to think before saying, "I don't know, I guess I never thought of it that way. But if I had to, I'd say maybe Alaska?" Alaska. Huh. You think the boy and his mother would like that? Mike says continuing the drive. I'm sure Brock never seen snow, but I'm sure he'd love it. Jesse says beginning to smile at the thought of Brock in the snow. And as they pull into the dirt parking lot of the chicken farm, they see Gus standing outside the door in front of the office. And Mike says while parking the car, "Alright kid, stay inside until I signal you to come out." He says leaving Jesse in the car, and he can barely make out the muffled conversation between Mike and Gus. But shortly after, Mike gives the signal for Jesse to get out and come inside. And Jesse is a little uneasy because he doesn't know what he's doing there, but he knows that Mike has his back, so he's not too worried. And once he gets inside, he sits in the chair that's in front of Gus, with Mike standing right behind him. And Gus says starting the meeting, "How's the boy doing?" "He's fine, and I never got a chance to say thanks, for the doctors," Jesse says nervously sitting in the chair. And Gus responds saying, "It is my pleasure to help in any way that I can. Now I understand that you may not have the same passion for cooking as you once did after everything that happened between you and your former colleague. And also given your contributions to the business, I have an offer for you that you might be interested in." Jesse sits up feeling his heart beating faster as Gus continues. "You finish out the rest of this week just to give my man a chance to learn the formula directly from you. Then our business will be concluded." "Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that," Jesse says a little taken back because he's still getting used to Gus's generosity. However, there is still one matter left to discuss about your partner. Gus says standing up, walking around the table towards Jesse. "That night, when Brock was poisoned, you said it was ricin. Why?" Gus questions directly, and Jesse is slow to speak, remembering back to what Mike said about keeping that a secret. "When me and Mr. White first started cooking together, we got into a situation with this guy named Tuco, and it was Mr. White's idea to use ricin to poison him, but we never got a chance to. And I thought Mr. White used that on Brock." Jesse explains, looking up at Gus, and he's quiet for a moment, holding eye contact with Jesse before exhaling loudly and saying, "I have a request to ask of you." And Jesse responds saying, "Yeah, what is it?" "Given your connection to Walter White as well as to Agent Schrader, the DEA will have questions for you sooner or later. And just as a precaution, I'm willing to relocate you and your family anywhere in the world as let's call it a severance package, because if I may be frank with you, it's just not in my best interest to have you in Albuquerque. This, I hope you can understand." Gus explains to Jesse, awaiting an answer, and Jesse glances over to Mike and then at Gus, nodding his head slowly and saying, "Okay, and yeah, I understand." "I'm happy to hear that. Going forward, Mike will take care of the arrangements, and if you need anything, just let him know and it will be taken care of," Gus says, concluding the meeting with Jesse as the two shake hands. A few days pass and the trial between Hank and Skyler is underway, and her having Saul in her corner gives her the added advantage of him knowing everything. And the narrative will be framed as Skyler being a scared wife who was only thinking of the safety of her children while her monstrous husband and brother-in-law forced her to be a part of their operations. And she was even scared to go to the cops because she didn't know who she can trust considering Hank's position as a DEA agent. And Saul tells Skyler, "Listen, I get it, he's family, but I've done enough cases in my time to know that this is only going to end one way. Either you put him away or he puts you away. And given my stake in the matter, I say we go for the jugular. And Skyler, with her back figuratively against the wall, with no choice, she nods her head and gets ready to testify, effectively putting all the blame on Hank in a tear-filled testimonial, framing him as the head of this meth empire started by him and Walter. And after some deliberations from the jury, Hank would be convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison for his crimes. And even though she did evade jail, Skyler would be in a different kind of prison, one where she's disowned by her sister and Walter Jr. for going against Hank and her late husband. But in the end, even if they never speak to her again, she did what she had to do for the safety of her family.
Someone has to protect this family from the man who protects this family.
We pick up with Jesse, Andrea, and Brock spending their last day in Albuquerque, packing up and getting ready to go, when out of nowhere, Jesse receives a visit from his two friends, Badger and Skinny Pete, who's there to see him off. And Badger says, "Man, I'm sure gonna miss you, Jesse," as the two dap up. And that's church, yo, but shit. I'm happy to see you all grown up, Jesse. Skinny Pete says, giving his dap as well. I mean, maybe I can come visit sometime, you know, meet up maybe after a year or so. Jesse says to his friends wanting to keep in touch. Honestly, man, if you're happy, that's all that matters, dude. I don't want you to feel like you have to come back and visit because I know everyone has their own life, so I get it. I'm just happy to see you make it out of here, Jesse. Damn, man, you're gonna make me cry and shit. But yeah, just take care of yourself, Jesse. We'll be alright over here. Skinny Pete says, agreeing with Badger. And in the middle of the conversation, Jesse spots Mike's car pulling up and tells him, "Well, alright guys, I guess it's time." And the trio daps up one last time before they go their separate ways. And Jesse then walks over to the car as the windows roll down, and Mike says, "You ready, kid?" And Jesse says, looking back at Andrea before leaning into the car window, "Yeah, let's do it." Hey guys, thank you so much for watching another video, and I really hope you enjoyed another story from the Heisenverse. And I gotta say, with this one, it's really safe to say that Jesse killing Walter in that moment is very bittersweet, because on one hand you have Jesse who's able to really get out and just have a true fresh start with Andrea, but on the other hand, as far as Skyler and Hank goes, that's a relationship that will never be healed, not to mention Walter and Jr. hating Skyler's guts forever. But I will say in this version, there is definitely a winner, and that has to be Gus Fring, because he has everything. Walter's formula, no loose ends, and he's free to make all the money in the world with no repercussion from the DEA. But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What you think of this version of Breaking Bad where Jesse wins, Gus wins, Mike wins, and everyone else loses? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you agree? Disagree? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments. And of course, shout out to the members of the Heisenverse. Feel free to join if you have the money at the time. If not, feel free to join my Discord. But that'll do it for me on this video, guys. Again, thank you so much for watching another video. And until then, my name is Murge. Later.